Welcome to Machine Builder Talk, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of automation, engineering, and the craft of building machines. Whether you're a seasoned automation pro or just starting your journey, you're in the right place to connect, learn, and get inspired. My name is Colin, and I'm your host, so let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Machine Builder Talk. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting Craig Borden, a seasoned controls engineer with a strong track record in the industrial automation industry. And by day, Craig applies his expertise to tackle electrical and control system challenges. But by night, he transforms into a podcast presenter and host. He is the host of a Blue Jays baseball podcast called the Jaybird Watching Podcast. And for anyone out there who doesn't know who the Blue Jays are, that is Toronto's baseball team, Toronto, Canada. And so he hosts that podcast, which is the actual official Blue Jays podcast of fansided.com. So based on Craig and I having three things in common, I think this is going to be an entertaining episode. Craig, welcome to Machine Builder Talk.
How are we doing, Colin? You having a great day?
I am doing great. Now I'm talking to you. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Good deal. Yeah, I'll take a break from my normal troubleshooting hat for 5 seconds, and we can talk some machine building, some automation, and hopefully just a touch of baseball to keep me happy.
Yes, it depends on how the Blue Jays started this year, I guess, right? And I don't think the opening day was very good, but I haven't watched or heard anything since, so I'm going to get an update from you on that afterwards.
So far, so good on that avenue.
Perfect. So, Craig, tell us a little bit about yourself, right from what you do in the daytime to what you do in the nighttime. You choose the order, completely up to you.
Well, you mentioned I'm kind of an odd duck because I am the weird engineer that likes to actually talk to people, Colin. There is that whole piece to that. So during the daytime, I'm a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. I've been doing electrical stuff since as long as I can humanly possibly remember. I grew up here in Rochester, New York, where I currently work at Calvary Robotics, and it's just kind of been in my family the whole time. My grandfather actually was an electrical engineer back in the glory days of Kodak here and literally helped put stuff in outer space. So some really cool stuff here in Rochester, New York.
Wow. So Kodak, wow. Kodak's going back. They used to be one of the most powerful companies in the world and did a lot of innovations and basically non-existed now because they decided not to keep up with times and go digital, right? So
my grandfather still says to this day, he goes, they had the digital camera when we were doing satellite spying on certain Russian people back in the day with film.
Yeah.
That the reason that they developed the digital camera back when was actually to not have to worry about retrieving the film from the satellite, Colin. You can do whatever you want with it.
That made sense. Actually, first digital camera I ever had was a Kodak DC-50, I think it was. Or it was DC-50 or DC-20. This was like 1993. And the resolution, I think, was like 640 by 480 was the resolution of the images. But
yeah,
it was
we'll
great.
pass that on our monitors these days.
Yeah, absolutely. So all fun, and we've come a long way since there. So what does your job in the day involve? I mean, you're talking about electrical controls. What does that actually look like?
So I am the hardware design manager in the controls engineering department at Calvary Robotics. And what my team does is specifically working with the mechanical engineers up front on the application itself, trying to ensure that not only are the mechanical needs being made to the customer, eventually we got to program this stuff. It's got to do all these wonderful things, actuate cylinders, air, pneumatics, sometimes very little as much anymore. Thankfully, hydraulics aren't as big of a mess anymore. But all these things need control systems, and we're the first ones in the conversation at Calvary Robotics electrically to start talking with these applications. So while we're doing these, it's a lot of figuring out and just seeing what tools fit properly for that customer up front. But then eventually my team's the one that works with producing the electrical drawings, pneumatic drawings, working with the shop team to build the actual product. And then we're obviously working with the programmers once they inherit the equipment once it's built. We're the design team. We really live with the whole entity of the project, where some of the other team members get to come and go.
Right.
And we have, I forget how many jobs we have currently on the build floor, but there's at least 7 that we're currently debugging that are built. And I have to hover around from every one of them.
Right. So you've got seven projects on the go at any time. Is that the most you've ever had, or have you had a lot more than that?
That's kind of the norm. We have 7 of them that are in different stages of what we'll call debug at the current moment. And obviously, the last piece of that is to get it out the door and get it to the customer and make sure they're happy. So, but we're building other ones at the same time. So that's always the challenge. We have ones in engineering, we have ones that are just starting to get built, and then we have ones that are, like I said, 7 of them currently in that one category. And that's a lot for that point because it seems like everybody hit at once. So everybody's always land like that.
It can be challenging when you're trying to finish off one project and start another one at the same time. I know that from my own experience. Now, you also have some field experience, so that brings a different perspective to your design skills, right? You have some outside knowledge of what goes on. So tell me a little bit about that.
So my previous employer right out of college, I worked for Harris Communications, which is now L3 Harris, which is one of the biggest communications companies in the world at the moment. And they're definitely I think they're the number 3 in military communications in the world right
Wow.
now. So
Right.
that's the division I happen to work for. And that's the reason I've seen every wonderful, beautiful city in Canada where you're from, except for Vancouver is the one big city in Canada I haven't been to yet. But we'll change that at some point. Um, but working on that avenue, I got to see how all our wonderful men and women in the armed forces break everything. So
Right.
it's a completely different aspect, and to your point, it's helped me greatly in the fashion of what I am in currently because I have some of this wonderful experience from seeing how things do get used in the field, get broken in the field, just some of the general silly things that tend to happen. And I get to turn around and reapply that information to either prevent it, fix it, or just make sure it doesn't happen on the following design. So it's always been a
Right.
very interesting piece to it.
Okay. So how many are in your team there at Cavalry, in your design team?
Design team, we have about 5, 6 people, and
Okay.
that's not including myself managing the group, but I obviously am helping steer said and mentoring.
Yeah.
But we have about 35, almost 40 actual engineers in the department.
Wow. And so tell us a little bit more. It's a good time to actually tell us a little bit more about what Calvary Robotics specialize in. What kind of robotics is that? What kind of projects do they work on? Whereabouts geographically that you are, and how far do you travel? I mean, how far does Calvary cover?
Well, we just finished a job, funny enough, not too long ago that went to Ireland. It's last I heard
Wow.
still en route. Because that's the wonderful part was sending a bunch of electrical equipment overseas. It's got to go on a boat. Not going to put all the stuff we did in a plane. So we're going to eventually do that install. But we are kind of, if you had to summarize the kind of automation we're doing with robotics to me, is we're more of a problem solver. So customer A comes to us and says, hey, we're trying to do X, Y, and Z things. We think this is a good process for us to automate. And we put our thinking caps on. We start working with the application, working with the customer, understanding their product, trying to figure out what we can and can't do. And eventually the applications and sales team will put that, here's our first stab at it. We're going to try it this way. If the customer
Right.
obviously likes that and likes the price, they turn around and then our engineering teams get it for the full kit and caboodle of it. Once we get that in there, we usually will take a lot of that stuff and massage it, clean it up. Maybe it's not as refined as it needed to be. Hopefully, it's not any major changes that would affect, schedule, scope, money.
So
But those kind of things.
you're
But
actually,
go ahead.
yeah. So you're actually not building any machines from scratch. You're improving, retrofitting, changing processes on existing equipment. Would that be
We don't
correct?
make, we do make, we are an integrator in every sense of the word at the end of the
Right.
day, but we're not making a lot of things that are just outside of like weldments and things like that for how we're going to put some of the mechanical pieces together. We need to make an actuator move. We're not making an actuator. We're not buying a computer and programming it from scratch. We're buying
Right.
Allen Bradley, Siemens, whoever's off the shelf controls things and slamming it all together to meet said goal for that customer. But no, we are
Right.
not, to your point, making anything blatantly from scratch. We do have some home cooked things that we do for what we use in our process as Calvary, I'll say intellectual property at the end of the day. We have very modular based system that we can start some of our designs off of that are meant to be a snap together, kind of like building a assembly line by pieces. And on some of the competition that we have because of that, we have a lot of that stuff already built. We have some of it already designed. It's a nice, real good starting point for us on some jobs that it works for. But that gives us a nice jump on schedule because we do have some of those things on hand that most of I would say, to your point, Colin, a lot of the things that we design, it's a good year and a half by the time it goes from customer requirements through that quoting stage through finally doing the engineering work and building it. That's kind of the typical loop for us is, ballpark a year. So this is not a small investment that these people are making when they come to Calvary to try getting an automated system.
Right. Okay. So can you, by any chance, tell us any of the type of customers that you work with? What kind of industries? Are you automotive? Are you food and bev, pharmaceutical, or a bit of all of those?
A little bit of all of it. Because at the end of the
Okay.
day, and this is where I'd say the thing that we get over some other integrators, we're not specifically niched to any of those or I'll say product lines or consumer equipment or anything like that. We've had green energy solutions. We've had 2 medical things in the recent history. We have a couple more that are in design right now in the medical field. I have one on the shop floor right now that's automotive, that's dealing with lug nuts and packaging lug nuts in an automated
Right.
fashion. We have all those kind of things going on. So, and then we've even had some things that were literally like how to make solar panels, how to make caulk tubes is another weird one we've had recently.
Wow.
So it's literally a catch-all, but it keeps it very interesting for walking into the engineering department because we get that wonderful, what are we going to do today out of it?
Right. So I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot and say, what was the
Sure.
most challenging project you've worked on? Tell us a story about the most challenging one.
Most of my big monster challenging ones are more in the retrofit and service ballpark. There's a fun thing with engineering having a balancing of constraints to be able to work with, and then there's another of juggling expectations, right?
Yeah.
So when we have those wonderful points where customers got this part of the process already figured out, maybe you're trying to take this middle piece out and put something brand new in its place to maybe change because their parts have changed, their processes changed, or maybe some of the ones that were I'll say the harder ones are always the ones it's not producing fast enough. How do we make it go faster?
Right.
And those are the ones that are always I'll say the bigger challenges because you're still dealing with the in that they had and the out that they had. So those in-feed and out-feed pieces are sometimes just as much of the restriction that you would get rather than the piece that you were just working on. So there's a lot of variables you got to take into account and keep going. And one of the ones that we did recently that I had it was his previous employer, but we were the parts were coming in so fast was part of the problem. And they didn't have the system there at the beginning of this, didn't have the best way of juggling and queuing up, buffing that kind of like
Right.
crazy infeed to the whole thing. So that was the biggest part we had to handle. And of course, it was alcohol wipes. So these things are little tiny packets about this big, and they're
Right.
just coming in like somebody's dealing cards at a Vegas casino.
Yeah.
So you have to figure it out and go for it.
And how did you do it? I'm just curious because I've got a curious
So
mind.
fun parts we had part of the problem was they shingled on each other too. So
Right.
for the robot, be able to get a cartridge of them and be able to eventually put them in the box, you had to get clever. And what we ended up doing was having all these kind of like lanes. So we would count how many were going in, and then it would divert quick within
Right.
our system, and you would be able to stack up 50 of them or so in a cartridge. The robot would handle the cartridges and then handle a box going into it. So we
Right.
had a very small little box erector that was, unfolding these little boxes because those things were actually what was really the problem. They just could never unfold the boxes quick enough. They couldn't handle enough of any kind of a stack. It was hard for them to count them because they were shingling all the time. And those kind of things were the parts that we had to iron out to get to that point. And it took a lot of weird little rollers to, flatten them back out before you could let them in all the way. It was a lot of mechanical and electrical fixes. And those are the ones usually I think that proves how good your team is at the end of the day, which we did a good job and we got it going. But at the end of the day, that could have been a very big undertaking if we didn't have some of the experience on the team we had, Colin.
Sounds like a good one. And I'm sure they're getting their money's worth now, and that's project's finished. But yeah, the challenge of those little alcohol wipes is them bending, right? So you're saying rolling them flat again and making sure they are flat and there's no
Mhm.
concave or convex shape to them, because that's obviously going to
If it stopped for even like a
obscure the
quarter of a
count or
second,
whatever, right? So
yep.
yeah, so interesting. All right. So
There's a lot of pre-planning and having like 10,000 redundant plans in the midst of that whole thing. So you
yeah,
had to react quick. If you had one thing that bottlenecked, it had to really quick to another spot on the machine. So it was
right.
wild. That was one of the more clever ones we've had to work on.
All right. So one of the other questions I typically ask on the show, so that was one of your most challenging one, and obviously a success in the end. Okay. I'm going to flip the coin on that. And we all have a personal, moment where we screwed something up or we forgot to put something on. Nikki Gonzalez in our last episode said she'd forgotten to tighten the set screw on a vision system lens. And so the vibration of the machine when
Fell
she
off.
left it, yeah, exactly. It came to a black image because the diaphragm closed completely after the lens fell off. But from your experience, what would be, let's say, your most embarrassing moment that you don't want to tell anyone about?
So being the weird person that, like I said, was a field engineer for a long time and then slowly got into automation. I traveled for my career for 12 years doing service stuff between L3 Harris and then another company here in town named Ambrell Induction. So electrical engineer working for an RF company, which is already a niche within electrical engineering. And then I went
Yeah.
further into that niche by going into induction heating, which is RF heating. So one of the jobs that I had to come and help fix, this one company was just doing some very simple hardening application, and we were trying to get some things going. Basically, they were going to heat the thing red hot, quickly dump it into a bath of oil so it quenched it and got it really solid. One of the silly things that I didn't even cross my mind, and looking back at it, it just like you said, slaps me in the face that I can't believe I didn't see it. We were moving the fencing around to make sure nobody would get near this thing because it is, at the end of the day, a red hot part. You don't want somebody going, "Oh, look at the shiny red thing," and just turning around and
Absolutely right.
getting
Yeah.
red molten hot with it. That's a workers' comp nightmare waiting to happen, right? So at
Yeah.
the end of the day, me and the gentleman that were working at this facility were, like I said, just moving the fencing around. Where we ended up anchoring it down, I didn't ask what the material of the fencing was made of, Colin. And in the midst of
Oh,
this, it was made out of aluminum extrusion, but I didn't think about the actual mesh part. It was
all right.
close enough to the induction heater that over the course of that week that I had left, the literally rubber had melted off of the mesh and was like a puddle on the floor. So
Right.
that's the funny thing about RF. It goes wherever you assume it's not going to go. That's just
Not gonna
how it
go.
works.
Right.
So
Yeah. So
it
that
was
what was the
just
remedy
close
of
enough.
that? Putting another grill on there with a different material or no rubber on it, I guess. Was the rubber there
We
for a
ended up
reason?
we ended up helping them change it to Lexan because it was something I probably should have helped caught. We
Yeah.
bought it. I went and installed it. you know, so
Right.
but in the midst of that, it got all resolved. But it's one of those things that at the time we were working on about 4 other problems with their process, their programming, how the things were moving around their system, and the gentleman and I were working on it. Who was the customer? Because they were just as entrenched in this process as I was. We both
Yeah.
kind of went, "Oh, oops." and
Oops. Well, it didn't sound that bad. That was pretty mild compared to some stories I've heard out there. But
I haven't crashed anything too severely. I've been, quote unquote, knock on wood, pretty fortunate in my controls engineering, career that I haven't had anything too bad. Nothing's
right.
blown up, nothing's lit on fire. Haven't seen a robot punch through a wall or anything like that.
So you ended up getting your bachelor of science in electrical engineering. Was that always the plan? because your father was an electrical engineer, did you always dream to become an electrical engineer, or do you have some other aspiration when you were younger that just totally didn't happen?
So my grandfather was the electrical engineer.
My
Both
apologies.
my parents happened to be Kodak employees, but were never in the engineering. I'm one of the very few engineering people in my entire family, as it is actually, or even I'll just say tech nerd in general. But I actually went to Alfred State College here in New York, and I actually intended on starting my degree as just going for my electrician stuff. At the time, I was right out of high school. I was working for Fairport Electric, which is a town municipal power line company here in the town I grew up in. And I'd already been working there for the summer, but I knew myself well enough. I'm like, okay, I just graduate high school. If I don't go to college now, I'm never going to go. I
Right.
just knew how my mind works. I need to stay in that mindset of school is school is school. I would never got back. So I was there for a little while, the first few weeks, and it kind of was like, this is all the stuff I've been doing on my job. What am I paying for? I had that self-aware moment and went and met up with the engineering department at Alfred State and more or less converted over. Um, then I was there for 4.5 years because of that transfer, because they're like, they warned me right off the bat. They're like, you're coming in 8 weeks late. You're going to suck. So thankfully,
Yeah.
they knew me after that time frame long enough that I did really well in my electrical classes, and they saw the potential. And I got caught up. Had to stay that extra semester, but in 4.5 years, I had my bachelor's in science and technology degree for electrical engineering.
Right. Well,
But no, that was not the original plan. But I did like electrical stuff.
but yeah, it was electrical based in the beginning, and it just ended up being a
Yes,
little bit more specialized as opposed to just being a journeyman electrician. And there's nothing
correct.
bad about just being, I shouldn't say just a journeyman
Yeah.
electrician. That's a great job, especially in this day and age where we've got a shortage of them, right?
To me, the paper is great. It does a wonderful bunch of things for you when you get a great college degree. But I have worked with just as many electrical engineers and mechanical engineers that were the school of hard knocks. They built the machines, they did this thing, they did
Yeah,
that, and transitioned to the department that I'm in. It's just how it works. I don't care how you got the experience. If you're good at your job, you're good at your job.
right. Yeah. So that's your work life, okay? And at like 5 o'clock, let's say roughly, you turn into someone else. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about what happens in your non-work time.
So I actually, when I was traveling all the time for Harris Communications, I had a lot of time to myself in airports. I met all these cool people. One of the things I liked to do whenever I was in whatever town is I tried to go to a baseball game, whether it was Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, just a giant baseball fan. Um, Played all through high school, tried to play in college, didn't quite make it there. But I just had this love for the game, and I kept goofing around, and I got hurt, funny enough, on the job. Had to have shoulder surgery, so I was sitting at home and was on one of the baseball websites that I read all the time, and it said, "Hey, we're hiring." All right, fine. Resume toss. See if anything comes of it. So about 3 days later, I got a phone call from a gentleman that worked at fanside.com, and which is funny enough now the company that sponsors my podcast. And he goes, I never thought I'd ever hire an engineer to do any kind of writing, but here we are. So I ended up being the minor league writer for 4 or 5 years, starting in 2015 when the Blue Jays finally made the playoffs for the first time in a million years, and had gotten into doing that for 4 years. And funny enough, Colin, I found out this part's a lot easier, just to sit in front of a microphone and chit chat with people, and formed my own podcast, which is the Jaybird Watching Podcast. That's all Toronto Blue Jays stuff. And it's been going for 455 episodes as of last night.
There we go.
So,
Yeah, that's the episode count of 455. I knew you were up at the 450 mark. That's yeah, five
yeah,
more added there.
we're getting to that point where me and my team that I've recruited, and I love them to death. They're great people. I get to talk with them and hang out and talk baseball every week. We've gotten to the point where we've gotten enough clout that some players have come on, and we've had a really good time chit-chatting with them and collecting all sorts of wonderful stories on that podcast that we're having fun sharing with everybody.
Yeah, I caught a couple of episodes there, and it is a lot of fun watching it, especially when the players come on and the passion they still have. Some of them are retired, but they still have that passion for baseball and Toronto. Toronto has got this storied history of being the first ever non-US based baseball team to win the World Series, right?
Yeah, you got it. And there was almost that one thing in 1994 that could have been an all Canadian World Series if there wasn't a strike.
That's right. That was the year before I came to Canada, and
Yep.
there was still this euphoria of the Blue Jays everywhere you went in Toronto at that time. And
Yeah.
they come off, 1994, there was the strike. So 95, I arrived, and I think they were just starting to get back into play in
Mhm.
95. And so that season, people still had a lot of expectations because, they won two World Series. They're basically going to the final of another one, or looked like they were going to go to the final of another one. So they still got the momentum going. There was still a chance of getting that third one,
Still had
right?
an amazing team, and it would have technically been back to back pause and then another back. It's because
Yeah,
they didn't have
yeah,
there was no World Series or anything in 1994, and they had won in 1992 in 1993. So and being the age of 40, I when I was a young kid learning baseball and everything, that was how I got into the Blue Jays. They were one of the best teams in baseball from the late 80s into the early 90s. How does that not, recruit me to watch more Blue Jays baseball?
Well, that was what I was going to ask you. Actually, you live in New York State, right?
I do. I'm about 3.5 hours away from Toronto because I'm on the Buffalo side of New York State.
Okay, so you're on the
That
yeah.
is where
So just
Rochester and Calvary Robotics are in the western part of New York.
right. So across Niagara Falls, go up that way,
Yep.
and across
If you were able to
401.
actually just draw a straight line from Toronto down, you almost hit Rochester
Right.
on the
Okay,
map.
that would make sense.
There used to
So
be a ferry that was wonderful that
they
used to bring us back and forth.
they did. They canceled that after a couple of years, right? The ferry's
Yeah, too
gone.
many problems
But
with the mechanics and all these things, I guess, with it. And they sent it to Australia, I think was the more wild thing. So crazy.
really,
Yeah,
wow.
it's a big damn boat to drive all the way over there. I know.
So the three things that I mentioned at the beginning we have in common, we're both controls engineers. Okay, number one, we're both podcasters because now you will actually be episode 7 when this is aired. All
Oh,
right, so
perfect.
I'm only 448 behind you, right? And I'm going to ask you for some tips because I mean you're like the 10,000 hours expert to compared to me just beginning,
Yeah.
right? And the third one is we're both Blue Jays fans. And I happen to be an accidental Blue Jay fan only because I really didn't pay much attention to baseball in the UK. I mean, obviously, football or soccer, as they call it over here, was a game of choice over there. And there was this year where baseball headlines came on the news in England. I mean, we never really heard baseball. I mean, maybe you'd catch who won the World Series, but that was about it. But
Yeah.
then there was when Toronto won the first World Series, there was a lot of news. There was a lot of news focus on it. Insight. There was film. It was like, oh wow, yeah, Toronto. And anyway, I ended up in Toronto a few years later,
After all that.
and became a de facto Toronto Blue Jays fan. It was a toss-up though between the Cubs and the Jays because I went to Chicago pretty early on, and I still have a fondness for those old stadiums. And so Boston, New York don't have it anymore, but it was Boston, New
It's
York, and
the same
Chicago,
one.
right? Yeah. No, but
As somebody that's been to both Yankee stadiums, it's the same field. It's just moved across the parking lot. It feels physically the same. But
right.
Fenway and Wrigley Field, to your point, are landmarks in baseball.
So that was a question for you. What is your favorite stadium in
Ooh,
baseball? You must have been to quite a few by now.
I've been to a lot of them, and it's a funny reason the one that I have that's my favorite. Obviously, my home away from home, I would say, is the Skydome Rogers Center in Toronto, being a Blue Jays fan. But my favorite ballpark I've actually been to, and this is a moderately controversial part because this isn't one of the highest ranked ones ever. Um, I used to have to go to Milwaukee a lot. And the Milwaukee Brewers, what used to be Miller Park, I forget what it's called now because it's about a mile long in the name, but Miller Park was beautiful, amazing. It's an indoor outdoor kind of like dome. The whole outfield can open up and you see out into the city, along with the dome. It's a really unique ballpark. And being from the Buffalo area of New York, we're notoriously known for being tailgate party people,
Right.
being Buffalo fans. I'm not being thrown through tables or anything like some of the stupid videos you see on the internet or anything, but it is a party culture. And I've never been to a baseball game of any level that people were out in the parking lot, hanging out, goofing around like a tailgate party. And that was the first time I'd experienced that at a ballpark. And I had never been there before. I parked my truck that I was renting while I was in town, and I met up with the gentleman that I was the customer I was with. There he goes, "Let's just go to the ball game." I'm like, "Good. I was planning on going anyway. Sounds like a plan."
Right. Yeah.
So, but when I met him in the parking lot, he literally pulled out a grill, and I'm like, "Are we tailgating a baseball game?" And he goes, "Yes, we're tailgating a baseball game." And I was like, "All right." Had a few beers and hung out in the parking lot, and then we went in and watched a great baseball game. And it's one of the also only a few ballparks I've been to that they actually play the radio broadcast over the stadium. And a lot of that was because Bob Uecker is one of the best announcers in Major League Baseball history. He's a comedian basically in his real life too.
Right.
And God rest his soul after this past off season. But it was just wonderful to hear something like that going on in the ballpark, along with the chatter and everything that you hear from everybody goofing around at the ballpark watching the game. But it was like a modern time warp, I guess, was the best way to
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
describe it.
That would be unique hearing the radio, especially if they've got the color commentator on there as well at the same time. Hearing that live while you're watching the game is very, unless you've got a little radio in your ear or something, it's very rare. You know, you don't see it at stadiums. So that's pretty cool.
At certain
Yeah.
points of the game, it added a little extra to it because you hear him getting excited as you're getting excited, and it was just fun.
I can imagine what that would be like at, for example, the Brazilian soccer or football game, where the commentators get very animated and they go through this long process of go. They do it. I'm not going to do it
Exactly.
because it goes on for a
You don't
long
want to
time.
spike
But
your mic.
have, having that live in the stadium would be quite something to hear, and
Yeah.
coming over the speakers anyway, especially. So,
Yeah, it just
all
adds
right.
to the celebration and all things that are culture around it. That's what I thought was really, really cool because, like I said, I've been to a bunch of minor league stadiums that had that everybody's chit-chatting and friendly, but that, like I said, being outside that tailgate, wandering around, just interacting and talking with people. I was wearing Blue Jay stuff in Brewers country, and they weren't even playing the Brewers, but so I think they played the Cincinnati Reds and a few other National League teams. Because the Brewers used to not play the Blue Jays very often. So,
No, right, because they're cross
mhm.
league. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So, good experience. Now, how do you find time to do all this? Because you're probably busy all day. I know it's not easy doing a podcast. There's a lot of work behind it. People just think you just show up and record things, but yeah, but there's a lot of work behind planning and getting people organized and scheduled, and the actual editing afterwards, and then
Yeah.
actually posting it on the whole podcasting network and YouTube or wherever. There's a lot of work on. How do you manage to do all that?
So I'm gonna lump it all together. My work, my play, all of that. So I am very blessed that I have a lot of great teammates and at work and in my personal life. So I have a great team at Calvary that I can lean on for any this thing, that thing. You know just as well as I know, no engineer knows everything. I don't care how much experience they have, how much money they're making. If they're not relying on their team, they don't get there. At Calvary Robotics, I have a great team in the controls engineering department that we can talk robots with. We have that's the beauty of I think what Calvary offers. We have great people that are in robotics engineering, controls and PLC programming, software engineering, and then hardware engineering in the controls group. We have an amazing group of applications engineers, mechanical engineers. This picture gets put together pretty well. And
Yeah.
when we have those questions on things, we have those people that we can go to. If you and I are working on something, and I know you're working on that PLC that you got hiding behind you there, and I got an idea, you and I
That
can
one.
sit down and talk about
Yeah.
it. So it's those kind of things. And then with the podcasts, I now have 3 of them because I'm just torturing myself
Yeah, that's right.
apparently.
You haven't just got the Blue Jays podcast. So have you got 2 Blue Jays podcasts out?
As of yesterday, I officially have the second one started. So that is Jay's latest, and that one, thankfully, I'm only doing this part to it, and there's a whole other team that's handling the other part. That's a company called
Production.
FanArc that I just became officially the host of their Toronto Blue Jays daily show, which is about 8-10 minute quick hit on YouTube every day. But like I said, that part I just had to worry about picking topics, sitting in front of my microphone and TikTok and chatting for a minute. I do another one that is all things nerdy. Whatever topic we want to talk about, if we want to have an episode talking about how fun it is to be a controls engineer, we can have that too. So, but it's mostly all this kind of fandom nerdy stuff that I have around me. So, we just actually had a talk about the Batman movies, and now we got to do like a talk about that because Val Kilmer unfortunately passed away
I
the
was
other
just
day as
thinking,
Batman. So that's TC Random Fandom. My buddy Tommy and I do that. But all these aspects, I have great people around me. And like I said, I can't be saying anything other than I'm blessed on that fact that I get to interact with as many people I do every day, Colin, and meet a common goal at work that it's like, hey, we want to put out the best machine with a robot in it that we can humanly possibly do to automate what we're doing for our customers. And then when I get home, I get to hang out with my lovely wife for a little while, and by the time she goes to bed around 8-9 o'clock, I turn into hey podcast guy. So
wow. Okay, so you're doing it that late at night. And congratulations on your second official Blue
thank
Jays
you,
podcast, by the way. So
appreciate
congrats on that one. Still more work. I mean, I'm just asking you how you could manage to do all that. Now you've just added more to it. Now,
it.
quick question about your wife. Is she a Blue Jays fan?
She is by proxy. She doesn't like baseball too much. She's more of a hockey chick. She's a Buffalo Sabres fan, and just like I am, and we're never going to win, I don't think. That's just how it is.
Right. Well,
So,
so comes down to the people. It really does. Everything really comes down to people at the end of the day. And you've got
yep.
a great team behind you at Calvary. You've got some great people working with you in the podcasting. Okay. Back to our industry. And one of the
Yeah.
struggles that we are having is getting younger people into the industry. Do you have any kind of insights into that? Some of the things that you're doing at Cavalry, maybe to attract the right people, or anybody at this point, I guess, that
Yeah.
might have the aptitude to be able to get into controls.
Yeah. So I'll tell you the Calvary part, and then because I didn't have enough to do from what you mentioned already, I still help out at the college that I graduated from back in 2007, which is Alfred State College. It's not a full-time thing. It's volunteer work. I love doing it, but I get to interact with the students, talk about senior projects. Hey, what's industrial automation? What do you do every day? How does your job look? What do people on your team do? I get to answer all those fun questions along with doing some mock interviews so they get an idea what they're going to get, literally slapped in the
Yeah,
face with when they get out into the working world. So my job on that whole thing is to provide an industry contact for them. I get to be that person that just says, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And Alfred State has roughly 20 electrical engineers and X pieces at the end of each year. Usually another 20 computer engineers, which are more in the software engineering ballpark. But out of those 20 students, 3 of them might be robot programmers and want to do
right.
that. 3 of them might want to get into utility distribution or whatever it might be. But those degrees at Alfred State get them going. And I'm actually going to be down there at the end of April talking and reviewing their senior projects with, funny enough, the industry people that they're doing it for.
Right.
So you want to talk about a company and how they can help form the new foundation of what engineering is going to look like going forward. One of the best ways I've seen is all these engineering colleges are always looking for real world applications for the students to do. So if you're working a mom and pop shop, you're working at a place like I am with 200 some odd people in automation at Calvary Robotics, what we're trying to do is give those real world projects that maybe have a longer deadline. Maybe they work with one of us as a mentor, but give them that real world experience by being paired up with us. And some of the things that I've seen the students done here in Rochester, New York, National Grid is the company that owns most of the power grid around here. They actually give Alfred State students a section of their power grid to work on and
Really?
upgrade stuff. And that's their senior project. They're obviously working with a mentor in that whole thing, but those two students that are working on that project, they have real world experience when they walk off, and most of them just keep getting hired by National Grid every year. I don't know why
Of
that would
course.
happen.
Yeah.
So, but those local college partnership programs, I think, are just mission critical to where we're going to eventually get to with having engineers that can hit the ground and run the first day that they show up to a job. You know, it's come a long way since I remember just kind of being thrown into the deep end of the pool and saying, "Hey, there's something broken over there. Why don't you go help fix it?"
I can relate to, yeah, it was when I was the only controls engineer in my company, they would send me to old machines and say, you know, you just have to fix it because there is no one else. And that was the first year working back then, it was all relay logic and
Yep.
micro switches and no sensors, no controllers that I could program. And most of
Been
those
there and troubleshot
panels,
those too.
oh yeah, most of those panels didn't have updated wiring diagrams, and they were,
No.
you know, they were jumpers from one coil to another, or one relay output to another coil that were never marked up on the drawings, and
Yeah.
it was a,
The- My
it was a,
my favorite part of being in those panels was always, okay, great, it's in the drawing, and you start pulling on the wire, and you end up like from where I'm sitting all the way around the room, all the way to behind me, and you've ran through
yeah,
15 ducts, and then you find on the other end there's nothing wired anymore.
exactly, yeah. It was certainly it was a baptism of fire, and essentially helped me get very logical because you had to be
Yeah,
extremely logical to work out relay logic systems. You know, no pun intended with the logic there, because you had to work out, well, the contacts on that one are powering up the coil on that one, which then is powering up the contacts going across from there. And it was
yeah.
just tracing it through, and
Then
then you would
what's
get
normally
one bad
open,
relay.
what's normally closed.
Exactly. Yeah, some of them actually
Trying
were
to
reverse logic,
visualize
right?
the
Yeah,
actuated state versus the resting state was always the fun part that I had to help beat into some people's minds, because it's so hard to realize that. And even when you're looking at ladder logic on a PLC, if you're not thinking like that too, it's the same thing. So
exactly. Yeah, you know, that normally open, normally closed is people have problems with that.
mhm,
And, you know, when it's normally closed, is that when it's powered or is that when it's not powered? Right?
yeah.
It's not when it's not powered, right? So, but people forget, and it's like, oh, which one is it? And
And if you didn't get thrown into that, you would have never learned that, because regardless of school or age or anything like this, they will teach you ladder logic, but it's like the perfect ideal, this is how it works scenario. It's not the it's been sitting here for 40 years. What do you need to do with it?
well, it's funny that you're talking about that. That's actually a good lead into the future. Now, ladder
Mhm.
logic's been around since the 60s, okay, 1960s, that is. And there was a reason that ladder logic was created, because it was a way to help electricians that were used to relay logic transition into software. So it kept the rungs the same, it kept everything as a diagram in the software similar to the actual real installations. Now, that was 1960, and we're still running systems on ladder logic when we have a lot of other alternatives now, which are either faster, more efficient. I mean, I'm talking about function blocks, I'm talking about a Boolean logic, and we have all these other systems, but they don't seem to catch in the industrial world. Do you have something to speak to on that?
I think the biggest thing on that whole thing is, and this is kind of even just certain things in general, the lack of just standard. You know, if you look at Rockwell, you look at Siemens, all these things, the default one is still ladder logic. No matter what
Yeah,
way you really cut it up. I'm using TIA portal with a Siemens PLC. It lets you translate to all those things, but if somebody like you or I that was taught ladder logic, I'm sorry, by the time I click over the structure text thing, I don't even know what's going on anymore. I can't fix it. So there's too many things now, I think, even just getting to the point where you and I wanted to get something going on the benchtop here, you grab an Arduino controller or something like that.
yeah,
That's a whole nother level of great. Here's another code base. It's similar to some of the things that I've been taught, but it's not the same thing that I've been taught. That ladder logic is just there. Everybody's been taught it in some fashion. To your point, it looks like a schematic. the regular electrician can even sometimes look at it and figure out, okay, great. If somebody sent me this code, that means this should be on. If this is, I can troubleshoot to that and run to it. Right.
Yeah. Right. You know, it's
So,
funny. You mentioned Arduino there. I found out last night that Finder, obviously a lot of people call them Finder, but Finder, the Italian relay company,
mhm.
they have an Arduino with a software layer that allows you to program it in ladder logic.
Oh, no way. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm glad I
So I
learned
just
something
found
today.
Yeah, so Sean Doyle, if you're listening to this podcast, that was you telling me that last night. He works for Fender, so
I've used their
Sean,
equipment
thanks
before,
for
but I
that.
would have never thought that their controllers had that ability to do it. But then again, a lot of the things that we're doing at Calvary, because a lot of the stuff we sent is either domestic or European, it's so just entrenched in Rockwell and
Yeah,
Siemens. I usually by the time we grab something in that Arduino world, it's a something really odd. We were doing one recently. I can't say who it was, but it was doing canning film and doing some certain things. But it was a piece of a controller that they had no idea how it worked. It was, I want to say, an Altera board chip at one
yeah,
point, but we couldn't get the code off of it. We knew what was going into it, we knew what was going out of it, but we had no idea how it was handling the product. So, in the midst of that, what did we do? Okay, well, we could have sat there with a controller for a PLC and had a brick by the time we were done of a bunch of wires and do that, or we were like, okay, well, maybe it would be easier to just buy the $100 Arduino and try it and see what we could get out of it. And we were able to take a lot of those analog signals and really marry it together, and just chunk the whole thing together, and it worked. And we were that much better for it. And it wasn't something that took up a half of a panel.
right. So, and a really economic way to do it as well, because if you think about a basic PLC these days, you're three times the price, even four times the price,
And
right?
we had a nice sized PLC in that application too at the end of the day, Colin. But at the end of the day, we just were worried that it wasn't going to have the processing time to be able to handle that very small specific thing. So we were worried about that, and we just decided that it was easier to chunk that piece off and try doing this with it, and it worked like a charm. I couldn't believe it. It took a lot of testing to get there, but
Yeah.
we got it.
Well, you know what? That brings up another really interesting conversation, and it's similar to the concept behind edge computing. Okay, so let's do some computing, some processing at the edge of a machine, not having to bring all that back to a central processor and then send it back out through the network again. So
Hmm.
edge computing has that, speed advantage of being able to process locally as opposed to centrally. And the the idea behind, sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. I remember where I was going with that. Talking about doing that actually on device level. So think about an I/O module, okay?
Yep.
And it could be Profinet, it could be Ethernet IP. It seems those are the two flavors that you typically work with. What do you think about putting logic, because I think there's two train of thoughts for this, logic at the module to be able to do some fast processing or even some basic logic there that you don't really need to put through to the PLC. What's your train of thought on that one?
So this falls back to I'll say my engineering rule number one. Right tool for the right job is really what I try to boil things down to. And the other ones is don't trust physics to be your best friend for, gravity dropping things.
Yeah,
It's interesting some of the things that you get to when it's like, yeah, don't pick that battle with physics. Just trust physics is going to do what it's supposed to do, and it'll drop the
yeah,
way it's going to drop, and then you got to deal with it. So, but with the fun with what you were talking about, I think during the beginning of a project, we talk about PLC architecture and network layout so much more these days than we used to when I got into this industry. And it is
absolutely.
because of those things that you were talking about. Okay, great. If you have a camera application that needs this much processing time, you probably want to make sure all the logic and everything that are fed from that camera image are done in a processor in a quick fashion, because you got to just wait for the camera to do so much stuff. So you can't wait for that to go up to the network to a main server with a big monster PLC to come back down to 3 inches down the way here.
Yeah,
to make a decision from. You got to find a way to compute that to your point right then and there. Or what we do a lot of times is we'll buy, the big rack from Rockwell or Control Logics, and we'll have Compact Logics ones down for
right.
certain
Okay.
other pieces that are, to your point, the local control, and then we'll run remote IO or whatever we need to do to get to those places, to the right proper places. It's come a long way with all the stuff that you're passing around networks and machine building these days, that
Yeah.
either you're going to have dedicated networks for certain things, or you're going to have that local computing, to your point, doing X thing at that spot and then reporting back up to the big guy on the network. And massively beneficial, but you got to plan that so early in a project to make sure it doesn't bite you in the butt.
And I think there's still some inherent dangers of firmware
Yeah.
updates being out of sync with each other, especially if you're doing it not so much at a PLC level because you've got a larger controller and you can actually access that from your other controller from your main network and do an update. But if
Mhm.
you've got an IO module, for example, and I talk about IO modules because that's what we
Easy.
specialize in, and we don't have a IO module with logic built in for that specific reason, is that if you've got, say you've got a really big line, let's say you've got 30 or 40 IO modules on that line, how do you keep them all in sync? We haven't got the software solution yet to be able to connect them all and check the firmware to make sure that they're all in sync and then flash them all at the same time if they need doing after we've first of all tested it on one, not on the main line, of course, right?
Yes.
We don't want to
Um,
do all 40 of them and then go for, oh, crap, we've got a really bad firmware on this one, or there's a glitch or something,
Yeah,
right?
and we've had those just like everybody else. You go grab that one extra IO card for a PLC out of the back, and it was in the stock, and the stuff you just bought is on the
Right.
machine, and it's a different version. It always happens. At Calvary, we get around that by a little bit of by happenstance, because we are always building something brand new for everybody. So a lot of the times we're buying everything brand new. It's not like we don't make a business on stocking a bunch of Siemens and Allen Bradley parts.
Right.
That's our vendor's job to stock.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but every once in a while, it's okay. Great. Like I told you, the design loop all the way time for a build is technically usually around a year by the time we have it done and installed at a customer's site. So, okay, you and I are working on something. Oh, we're short 4 sensors that you and I didn't plan for whatever this application, or it wasn't working maybe the way you and I thought it might. And the solve was we have to add more IO to it. Okay, great. That card that you and I bought or grabbed off the shelf or whatever it might be, to your point, could be a different firmware version on something, or a different rev that has a little bit of something odd in it. Or the other, my favorite is that you grab the one rev out of a million that actually is the one that's a problem, and you have to return it because of that problem.
Always. Right.
So while you're doing those kind of things, you just got to kind of, to your point, you got to plan accordingly. You got to deploy things properly. But a lot of those things, like I said, because we're building mostly one-off machines, or only maybe 6 of that same machine, for example, we buy all that stuff in bulk, or you're buying it for that build to build to build rather than it being a one-off. We thankfully, because of those, we get around a lot of those because we're buying it in bulk together for the job. Designed, here's your bill of materials, throw it to the purchasing department and let them run with it.
Right.
But
Gotcha. Okay.
and once it gets to the customer, as long as it's working, they don't touch it.
No, absolutely. And so they don't do any firmware updates themselves.
Exactly.
And
Where
right.
we've
And then,
seen, yeah, go ahead, finish your thought.
no, I'm just thinking that you would be responsible for doing that, I guess, if you needed to do a firmware update to that customer. But certainly probably in the first year.
Yep.
After the first year, then it probably is their responsibility, but they would probably call you to do it anyway. Is that
And that's
correct?
what we have a lovely service team for. That's who I
Right.
work with all day, every day, because it's one team, like I mentioned.
Right. So
Uh,
your service team right now, are they extremely busy? I've got a purpose for this question.
it seems like everybody's always looking for that piece to it. And to me, being a service person, as long as I was in my career, Colin, that's a nice, wonderful foot in the door for somebody in a sales opportunity eventually. If you're my customer and you're in a down situation, and whoever made the thing to begin with is can't get there somebody quick enough, maybe they don't want to talk to you anymore, as you thought you were a bad customer or something, whatever the relationship issue is, They call up somebody like Calvary Robotics and say, "Oh, we can have a guy there tomorrow or in the next 2 days and get you saved. You do a good job. Guess what? That save turns into an opportunity for maybe them to knock on your door the next time they need a piece of automated equipment. So it's a beautiful relationship, and you put a smile on somebody's face because it's always nice to be able to, like I said, turn around and fix the situation. So
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
those are the same as a pulled grenade, but let's see what here.
Sometimes. Well, the reason I was asking, Craig, was that, a lot of companies we work with, their service departments are extremely busy, busier than ever, because capital projects are not being released. More so because of the uncertainty of the economy and the political climate and tariffs on,
Yep.
tariffs off, and that kind of thing. And so finding that, that these project books, these quote books are getting bigger and bigger, and they're not being released. They're sitting there. They've got bigger project books than quote books, I guess. They're not projects yet. That bigger than ever before. But the service teams are extremely busy because they're going out and keeping those old machines going, right? Instead of them being replaced.
PLC fours in it. You got to keep it moving. It's just
Well, there's still PLC threes out there, you know. Go back even further, right?
we actually had a service call recently that had PLC fours in it from
Wow.
Rockwell.
Well, and yeah, you probably can't get spare parts anymore, but they're still going,
It
right?
got up and running. That's all they cared about. So I
Yeah.
hope they're not planning on band-aiding those too much longer because those got to be what 1980 something probably when those.
Yeah, the PLC 5 was around about 1990, right? So,
Yeah, so it had to have been early 80s. So
yeah.
I've only had to deal with them because of service calls, but is what it is.
Okay, I'm gonna start wrapping up. We're coming up to about an hour here. So there's one question I like to ask is what's one tip or one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self if you were coming back into this industry? Like if you can go back 20, 30 years and say, do this and you'll be better off in the future.
Um, I think the only thing I could recommend in that whole thing is, as much as I've loved the people I've worked with, I wasn't the best advocate for my own personal growth earlier in my career. I kind of was like in the ballpark of, well, if I do a good job, they'll keep promoting me. The problem is nobody
Yeah.
notices the good work; they only hear the horror stories. So I would highly recommend to young engineers, as you learn more and more, make sure you do have that check in with yourself every once in a while and to say, what am I doing well? How marketable am I? Am I in the right position? And thankfully, I'm in the right position, but it took me a long time to get to the where I felt my career and my pay and all these kind of things actually lined up. And the first parts of my career, I kind of didn't notice that because I was traveling all the time and million and one other things. So, but at the end of the day, as an engineer, you're your best advocate. Make sure you're looking for the right team to be working on along with that too. Because, like I said, I have a great team I get to play with and work with every day here.
And it really is a team that can escalate you higher and faster, having that support behind you and the
Yeah,
knowledge that they can share with you, right? It's a thing. So on that note,
yeah,
just to finish up, there's a great piece of advice. One piece of advice I give younger people, and something I wish I'd done when I was younger, was to have a goal plan for 5 years at a time. So every 5 years, assess where you're at. Is this where I wanted to be? If not, then I've got to do something about it. That way, your career doesn't get out of control and you end up going down the wrong direction for too long. You've got 5 year intervals. And so, for example, I want to be the CEO of this company in 5 years, then, that's my goal. And if I'm not that CEO in 5 years, what happened? What have I got to do differently? Where have I got, am I at the right company to be able for that to happen? So those are the goals. Now, the other question that I get some guests to answer is what is one tool or one bit of software, one thing in your daily work life that you could not live without?
yeah. So here's the thing that so I have been, yeah, obviously as a design engineer at the end of the day for control equipment, having a great CAD program is central to my life, along with the tools that feed what I need to put on the paper. So I can say a lot of great things about a lot of different software packages, but I've gotten into ePlan very efficiently over the last 5 years. And what I've seen the evolution of that program do as an electrical CAD program has been nothing short of mind blowing. I'm getting things done quicker than what I used to do in AutoCAD with a full library that I built up. And I'm making less mistakes, less button accidental move arounds and things like that, regardless of it being regular straight AutoCAD, AutoCAD electrical. I have been very, very happy with the ePlan program, and thankfully that's becoming more and more of an industry standard. I believe the big automakers, the only holdout right now is currently Chrysler. Rivian, Tesla being the two, obviously the shiny new objects in the car market, but Ford, GM, all these companies are using ePlan all day, every day. So it's not just a little mon pop, here's your stuff. They're actively trying to improve that program year to year, and I have noticed. So it's been
Two comments on that. One, Stellantis, they're a European owners now. So Stellantis is European. You'd think they would be on the ePlan route. Seems that ePlan is European.
Yeah.
And secondly, you don't know this, but last week's guest, which is actually not being aired yet, also said the same thing. And she is an electrical designer here in Canada. And she said that ePlan is the tool that she can't live without. So I should call ePlan and see if they want to sponsor the show,
I got a guy for you. And outside of that, to go with ePlan, I've kind of, for me and my team, and keeping our own sanity, because when you're doing a design, there's things coming at you from everywhere, and you kind of need some nice way of just getting your thoughts together, putting it on paper, and kind of being able to do this before you just jump into drawing. That was one of the things I've seen people repeatedly miss on Colin, is you jump too quick to just diving into the drawings, and then it becomes an immovable object. Thankfully, in ePlan, it's a lot better. But
Yeah.
okay, great. Let's say you only gave yourself 10 pages for the 480 volt power distribution. Well, guess what? You need that 11th page all of a sudden, and trying to shove that page in there when you already got something on sheet 11 can be a kind of a pain in the butt.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Those are the kind of silly things that ePlans make really easy to shift those things around. But I kind of made a Excel sheet that I call the design book for electrical, and it kind of puts it in the order of the way that I intend the drawing to come together, working through your power distributions, get to your IO, here's your transformer calculation page, here's your service calculation page, and then you kind of build up the drawing from that. And I think every design engineer has some level of that tool in their hand, but there's not anything that's just out there and available that's beautiful for you to just type your stuff into and run with. So
And every design engineer is going to do things differently, and they're going to have their own version of that. Call it a playbook, right? And it will get changed and refined over time. It's never finished. It always evolves, right?
correct. I had to recently add 208 5-wire services into it because I didn't have any math for a 208 5-wire in it for calculating the
Right.
amperage. All the stuff was how to get it up to 480, because 9 times out of 10, that's what we do for a service. So if
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out how the service is, I should be able to plug in everything here on the 120 side. Okay, that means it's this transformer. And then here's my main at my 480 as far as amperage goes. And I was looking at that the other day, and I'm like, oh, shoot. Because the beautiful thing about a 5-wire 208 is that I don't even have to worry about a transformer for the 120. I can just pull the
Yeah, you
right
can
legs
just
and call.
tap it off, right? Exactly. Yeah.
And that was where the calculator.
Now it is.
So
Yeah, that's something that I think is a good habit. If you do something once and you know you're going to need to do it again, make it some kind of template or some kind of macro that you can just reuse. And I think
just write the notes down, something. Don't do the work twice.
Well, before I go to the part where I ask you where people can find you, I just want to give a shout out to Zach Bauer. He's at Mur Electronic. He's the one that got in touch with Calvary and set this up. So I got to thank Zach for giving me the opportunity to spend this time with you, Craig. And it's been a fun chat, really. I'd love to meet you in person and talk about the Blue Jays and the controls a little bit more. But where can anyone find you on LinkedIn or websites? Can you tell us?
Well, definitely make sure, if you're looking for automated systems and solutions like that, make sure you check out CalvaryRobotics.com. We're here in Rochester, New York. And like I said, we're kind of a odd duck in the fact that we like to just solve problems. So knock on the door, drop us a message, check out what the sales team can offer for you. To find me personally, All social media platforms at Birdwatching GC, because there's the fun part about where the podcast started. We actually started just goofing around as the Birdwatching Gamecast, and we were literally just talking over the baseball feed and acting like we were announcing the ball game. Is at the time the Blue Jays announcers were a little rough, so we were like, "This is the easy way in." A few people got into it and told us, "Hey, you really should just move this to be a podcast." Then it became the Jaybird Watching Podcast. So didn't want to change all the social media and everything. So it's Bird Watching GC on TikTok, Twitter, X, all that kind of stuff. All on with the other nerdy one, TC Random Fandom. Same thing. If you want to talk Star Wars, Batman, any other weird nerdy things that you want to be a fan of. This week we are actually celebrating the 30th anniversary of the movie Tommy Boy, which is a Chris Farley movie. So we are going to talk all things Chris Farley this week. So that's going to be a fun.
30 years. Wow. That movie seems like it wasn't too that long ago, but 30 years.
Made
wow.
me feel like I'm 40. It doesn't seem like it was 30 years ago.
And if you happen to be driving while you're listening to this, I will put those in the show notes. So there'll be links there for everything we've talked about on here. So Chris, with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining me on the show. It's been a privilege chatting with you, and it's been a pleasure. So thank you for joining me, and good luck with the rest of the season with the Jays. It's right at the beginning, so hopefully they'll make the playoffs this year.
Off to a good start. Opening day was the only downer, so you watched the wrong day.
I did. So how are we doing since then?
They just swept the Nationals, so we're 5-2 and technically in first place. I don't know how that happened.
Oh, that's looking good. Okay, well, Toronto teams don't do too well in general. We have a hockey team here that haven't won in 57 years.
Yeah,
coming up to 58 years this year, I think, 67. So
the
Blue Jays
we're due for a championship somewhere here.
Well, we have the Raptors that were the last, Toronto champions, the Toronto Raptors, the basketball team. But it would be nice to see the Jays come back and win. That would be great. That would be something I've never seen in my lifetime being here. And I've been here for 28 years this year. Yep. So
in the city when the team is winning, there is not much things that are more fun than that.
No, there's a buzz, that's for sure. Exactly. Again, Craig, thank you again. I really appreciate you being on the show. And take care of yourself. And hey, I encourage everyone to check out Craig's 3 podcasts now. Okay. So especially if you're a Blue Jays fan, you're going to see some really good stuff on his Blue Jay podcast.
Good deal.
Okay.
Thanks again, Colin.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Craig. And that's a wrap for today's show. So thanks for tuning in to Machine Builder Talk. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to click subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you really like listening, a quick review goes a long way to help more machine builders and automation pros like you find the show. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building.